Bonjour. Okay, before we do anything else today, I want to make sure that we're really clear on what we need to do in order to get an A on the test you're going to retake tomorrow. Excuse me. So we'll get back to what we're doing, but we want to make sure we focus on this today so that when you take your test tomorrow, you don't just make the same mistakes that you made before. It doesn't do any good to retake something if you're not learning anything in the process. So that's why today we're going to focus on getting ready to retake the Chapter 1 test. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at this problem we have. I'm working really hard, but I keep getting Fs. What kind of essay gets an A in French 3-4? So in order to write the right kind of essay, you have to know what the right kind of essay looks like. So I took a look at the test that I graded, and there were a couple people who did incredibly well. So I'm just picking one. This is not the only person who did really well, but this is one that's really easy for us to look at and see what did they do right. So the first thing I did was I printed it up for you here so you can see. You're going to notice one thing. There are a lot of accents missing. It's very hard to get the accents correct in Google Docs. I know you have to use accent add-on and sometimes it doesn't work and whatever. So I'm just happy when I see a few accents even, and I see a few in this one. So I'm not worrying too much about the accents right now. What I am worrying about is, are you talking about the vocabulary that needs to be talked about? Does it have the right format? Does it have the right information? And are you using lots and lots of Big Mac words and phrases? In other words, transition words and phrases. So I'm just going to read you the first paragraph. Actually, I'm going to read you the whole thing, and I'd like you to read along with it. Il s'appelle Josh. Il fait ses devoirs à la maison, mais il a sommeil. Il est intelligent et parle français bien parce qu'il étudie beaucoup. Il est actif parce qu'il joue au foot et tennis bien. Il toujours joué au foot au parc après il fait les devoirs. Now, you may have noticed already, this is an A paper, but there are mistakes. Getting 100% in French does not mean you don't make mistakes. It means that you have gone beyond just writing a short essay, but you're still making mistakes, partly because you're taking risks that if you were not taking them, your paper would not be so good. Let me keep going. Le père est gentil aussi et il est canadien. Il travaille souvent pour faire le ménage. Il a faim, alors il cuisine. Il ne cuisine pas très bien, mais il a faim. Après ça, il fait la vaisselle et le ménage. La mère est française et intelligente. Elle travaille, mais elle a sommeil. Après travail, elle va des achats pour dîner. Elle cuisine très bien, alors elle fait le dîner. Elle fait les achats, mais elle est en retard pour faire le dîner. Alors, elle rentre à la maison et prépare le dîner pour la famille. So you're going to notice as I'm reading that, there are actually a fair number of mistakes in here. This is not a perfectly written paper. The point is, the writer went beyond just writing something safe, took some risks, didn't necessarily do well in all of them, and that's okay. So let's look at the first thing I'm going to notice. The first thing I'm going to notice is there are some really blatant, what I call significant errors. Those are errors where it really kind of changes the meaning of the sentence. So I selected 5. And these 5, I'm willing to say, okay, I understand where the guy came from, and I don't have to take lots of points off. Il toujours joué. It should be il joue toujours. And the jouer, joue, shouldn't have an accent on the E. But there's a mistake. Not the end of the world. Le père est gentil aussi et elle est canadien. He means to say il. We often mix up il and elle when learning French, because especially if we speak Spanish, they can look like mixed up to us. Après travail, after work, sounds right in English, not quite right in French, but I know what the writer means, so I accept it. Elle va des achats, it should say elle fait des achats, right? Because that's a faire expression. And the last one is not even that important. Elle fait le dîner. There was no le in what he wrote. I added the le because it just said she makes dinner. And in French, you have to say she makes the dinner. It's just a little thing. The next thing I want us to look at, and these are now in red, are all of the vocabulary pieces the writer used that are from this chapter. Remember, we did expressions with faire, avoir, être, and aller. So I'm looking for those when I'm reading. Look at these. We have il fait ses devoirs, il a sommeil, il fait les devoirs, il fait le ménage, il a faim, il a très faim, il fait la vaisselle, il fait le ménage, elle a sommeil, elle fait des achats, elle fait les achats en retard. So that's a lot of vocabulary from this chapter. And right there, this person has already earned an A from me because for the most part, he used them all correctly. He didn't rely on last year's vocabulary. He relied on this year's vocabulary, which is what you're being tested on. And it's up to you to make sure that you put that in your essay. The last thing I want us to second to last thing is I want us to look at how many Big Mac phrases and words he used. Mais, bien, parce que, beaucoup, parce que, après, aussi, alors, souvent, très bien, après ça, mais, très bien, alors, mais, alors. There's lots of really good stuff in here that's holding the sentences together. It's the difference between having a hamburger on 2 pieces of bread and having a Big Mac, right? 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions, on a sesame seed bun. We've talked about that before. That's another thing that makes this essay wonderful, is that there's so much in it that makes it full. It's not just a skeleton. There is, however, one thing we all need to be really careful of that this particular writer didn't do so well, and that is indenting. If you look at the difference, right? This is the way it was handed in. This is the way it looks indented. I should be able to look at it and know you've got 3 paragraphs. You're talking about 3 different people, 3 different pictures. If I just look at it like this, I can't really tell. But now I know, yes, 3 pictures, 3 people, very clearly defined. The last thing you really need to be careful of are these things I call the nitty-gritty. These are things you should already know by now. You are at least a sophomore in high school if you're in this class. You need to know to indent every paragraph. You need to capitalize the first word of every sentence. I can't tell you how many people do not do that. Correct punctuation at the end of a sentence. A sentence cannot end in a comma. It must be a period, an exclamation point, a question mark. We can't just end it with a comma. You can't string all your sentences together with commas. You end up with one long sentence that makes no sense. And the last thing, skip a space after a period. Do not just put period, letter, period, letter, period, letter. Some people skip 1 space. Some people skip 2 spaces. It depends on how you were trained because they've changed the rules. I don't really care. I just want you to be sure you skip a space between the period and the next letter. This is stuff that makes your writing more legible, more readable. If you give me a beautifully written essay, but it's so badly put together in terms of construction like this, I'm not going to be able to understand what you're talking about. A few spaces and periods and paragraphs can set things apart so that they actually make sense. So let's just review really what we talked about with this, right? We talked about how we want to make sure we have few mistakes as possible, but we're not going to feel like we have to be absolutely perfect to get an A. You're doing the best you can do. Don't not try something just because you might not get it right. You get credit for trying to make a more complicated sentence, even if it doesn't work out so great. That's better than 2 or 3 really little simple sentences. The next thing we looked at was how much of our vocabulary have we used? How much of this chapter's vocabulary is in this essay? That's what we want to pay attention to. And then how much meat did we put in with it? How many additional transition words, what we call Big Mac words and phrases, do we put in to make it more than just a list of short little sentences and make it nice, long, interesting sentences that flow into each other? And then the last thing was, of course, paragraphs, punctuation, capitalization, skipping a space after a period. So we're now going to stop and we're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing next. You can go back and review this video if you wish to, and it can remind you of the things that you need to do. Also, take a look at this little essay and see what you can get from it. What can you learn from that essay about what you want to say? Okay, so thank you. That is the end of our jolie vidéo. Le vidéo se termine maintenant, mais j'ai un problème. I have a problem. I can't figure out how to stop it. I always have this problem. Au revoir.